The frosty air clawed at my old lungs as I loaded a tattered suitcase into the trunk of my ancient Buick. 67 years old, retired, a house on the outskirts of Richmond, and silence broken only by the creak of floorboards and the ticking of the grandfather clock on the wall. That was my life after Elaine's death 3 years ago. I, Terrence Bolton, a former instructor at the military academy, am now just a lonely old man with a stubborn temper and too big a house. The neighbors stopped inviting me to barbecues a long time ago. Maybe because of my habit of saying what I think, or maybe they just got tired of hearing stories about my 30 years of service. Elaine was the only one who accepted me for who I was, straightforward to the point of rudeness, with a lousy sense of humor and a habit of waking up at 5 in the morning, regardless of the day of the week. Without her, the house has become a museum of memories. Her crocheted plaids still lie on the couch, her gardening tools rust in the shed, and her recipes, written down in fading ink, gather dust in the kitchen drawer. Our son Owen called exactly once after the funeral to let us know that he and Rebecca couldn't make it for Christmas because they had a vacation planned in Barbados. "We need a vacation, Dad. Rebecca got a promotion at the TV station, and I have a new project in the lab. Maybe we'll stop by in the spring." Spring came and went, followed by another, and another. Owen didn't show up. I've seen my son twice in the last 3 years, and both times were business trips during which he dropped in for an hour, constantly answering messages on his phone. Little Piper, my only granddaughter, remained an almost unfamiliar child to me. 10 years and I could count our encounters on my fingers. In the pictures Rebecca occasionally sent, the girl always looked flawless. Perfect dress, perfect hair, perfect smile. It was like a porcelain doll, not a living child. Every time I tried to talk to Piper on the phone, Rebecca gave me 1,000 reasons why it wasn't a good time. Music lessons, French lessons, preparing for a school pageant. It was like my granddaughter wasn't a child, but a project to be perfected. The last conversation I had with Owen was a month ago. I called to invite them to Thanksgiving. "Sorry, Dad, no way this year." His voice sounded distant, like an answering machine. "We already have a party planned. Rebecca's co-workers from the network, a few of my lab partners. Important connections, you know?" "And Piper?" I asked. "How's she doing?" "She's great. She won a science contest in high school. Just like me." "Surely. Why don't you put her on the phone?" "She's in cello class. Rain check, okay?" It's always some other time. That's when I decided I was done waiting for an invitation that would never come. If the mountain doesn't go to Muhammad, as Elaine used to say. In addition to the suitcase in the trunk was a box containing a gift for Piper, a stargazing kit. The store clerk assured me it was a hit with kids her age, but I had no idea if my granddaughter was interested in astronomy. In fact, I didn't know much about it at all. Did she like to read books? Did she prefer dogs or cats? Was she afraid of the dark? These simple things that every grandparent should know remained a mystery to me. I slammed the trunk shut and looked around my house. The peeling paint on the front, the weedy garden plot that Elaine had once lovingly cultivated. Everything looked neglected, just like my life. I had nothing to leave here. Getting behind the wheel, I started the engine and turned on the radio. Old-fashioned jazz blared from the speakers, the music Elaine and I had danced to at our wedding almost 45 years ago. I thought I could smell her perfume, as if she were sitting next to me in the passenger seat. "I'm on my way to reconcile the family, Ellie," I mumbled into the void. "Do you think it'll work?" The answer was only the melody of a saxophone and the rustle of tires on asphalt. The drive to Colonial Beach took about 3 hours, a small coastal town where Owen had moved his family 5 years ago when he'd gotten a job as a lead chemical engineer for a major pharmaceutical company. Rebecca had taken a job hosting a local TV station, and together they made it seem like the perfect American family. A successful scientist, a media-savvy, beautiful wife, and their talented daughter. I never understood this obsession with external well-being. Elaine and I lived modestly. Her salary as a school teacher and my military pay kept us afloat, but not much more. We went on vacations to campgrounds, not exotic resorts. We wore clothes until they wore out, not chasing fancy brands. And we were happy. Owen grew up different, always dissatisfied with what he had, always wanting more. I noticed this as a child when a new toy pleased him for a couple of days and then he wanted another better one. As a teenager, this developed into a real obsession with success. Better grades, a prestigious university, a career that would impress those around him. Rebecca, whom he met in college, only intensified those aspirations. Ambitious, calculating, with a dazzling smile and an icy heart. That's how Elaine characterized her after their first meeting. I was less diplomatic in my assessments, which led to my first serious quarrel with my son. "You're always judging everyone," he threw at me then. "No one ever meets your standards." Maybe he was right. Maybe my years in the Army had made me too straightforward, too incapable of compromise. But I'd seen the way Rebecca looked at our modest living room, at the worn furniture, at Elaine's homemade jewelry with barely concealed contempt. I've seen her wipe her hands with a napkin after shaking hands with our mechanic neighbor. And I saw what kind of man my son was becoming around her. Cold, calculating, constantly assessing whether what surrounded him was prestigious enough. The wedding was lavish with 300 guests, most of whom I was seeing for the first time. Elaine cried when Owen refused the traditional father-son dance at the banquet, citing that it was old-fashioned. She and I felt like strangers at our own son's celebration. After Piper was born, I hoped our relationship would improve. Nothing brings a family together like the arrival of a new generation, but Rebecca set a strict visitation schedule of 2 hours once a month, so as not to disrupt the baby's routine. Then the visits became even less frequent. After each one, Elaine returned upset. "They're training her, Terry." Not training her, but training her. Like a show dog. Elaine left without ever seeing her only granddaughter grow up. The cancer proved relentless and swift. Diagnosis in January, funeral in March. In those terrible months, Owen came only twice, each time hurrying back to his perfect life. The road looped among the rolling hills of Virginia. The trees stood bare, ready for winter, the sky overhanging a gray shroud, promising snow. Thanksgiving was early and unusually cold this year. The thermometer on the dashboard read -17, a rarity even in December, let alone late November. I stopped at a gas station to stretch my legs and get a coffee. The clerk behind the register, a woman about my age with kind wrinkles around her eyes, asked me how far I was traveling. "To Colonial Beach, to see my son and granddaughter," I replied, surprised at how natural it sounded, as if I were a welcome guest, not an uninvited visitor. "Thanksgiving is family time," she smiled. "You're lucky to have someone to go to." I nodded, not daring to shatter her illusions. After all, she was right. Thanksgiving was a time for family, and I was going to remind my son of that. Back on the highway, I turned on the windshield wipers as a light snowfall began to fall. White flakes swirled in the air, settling on the sides of the road. Elaine loved the first snow. She said it washed away all the bad things that had accumulated over the year, gave her a fresh start. I wanted a fresh start too. I wanted to believe that it wasn't too late to mend relations with my son, to get to know my granddaughter for real, to create the kind of family Elaine had dreamed of. But somewhere deep inside, there was a doubt. Had the water gone too far? Had we become two different people? Owen had chosen his own path, built his own life, and in that life, I was a rare guest, nothing more. The snow intensified, turning the road into a white haze. I slowed down, looking at the blurred outlines of the road. Suddenly, a song came over the speakers, the same song that Owen had danced his first dance to at the high school prom. Elaine had cried with pride, and I'd made a stern face, but I'd felt my heart ache. My boy, so grown up, so beautiful, with such a future ahead of him. When did it all go wrong? When did the warm family bond turn into formal holiday cards and infrequent phone calls? Maybe it started when I missed his college graduation because of an urgent business trip? Or when I didn't approve of his choice of bride? Or did it all accumulate gradually, like snow on the side of the road, unnoticed until one day it became an impenetrable snowdrift? I could analyze the past all I wanted, but it didn't change the present. And the present was that in an hour I would be standing on the doorstep of my son's house, uninvited and perhaps unwelcome. And I would have to face the reality of our relationship, as bitter as it was. But for Piper's sake, for Elaine's memory, I had to try. Because after all, what do we have besides family? What's left when all material accomplishments are meaningless? Only the people we love. Only the bonds we built. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and continued on through the veil of snow, toward the unknown, toward my family, whatever it turned out to be. Colonial Beach greeted me with gray clouds and a piercing wind off the bay. Snow mixed with sea spray, creating a treacherous crust of ice on the roads. I slowed down, looking at the signs. Though I'd been here before, this town had always been foreign to me, too perfect, too much like an advertisement. Neat Victorian houses with white picket fences, a wooden boardwalk, little cafes serving authentic clam chowder to overpriced tourists. In summer, the place is swarming with vacationers from Washington and Richmond. In winter, the town goes into hibernation, leaving only the locals, as cold and unapproachable as the November sea. Owen and his family lived in an upscale neighborhood on a hill overlooking the entire bay. Their house, 3 stories high, colonial style, with columns at the entrance and French windows, was one of the most impressive in the neighborhood. I remember Owen proudly giving me a tour on my first and only visit here 2 years ago. Wine cellar, home theater, gym, separate bathrooms for each bedroom. 5,000 square feet of living space, Dad, he informed me then, as if the size of the house was the major accomplishment of his life. I only nodded, unable to find the words. Elaine would have said that such a huge house would be uncomfortable, that a real house should embrace its occupants, not overwhelm them with its scale. But Elaine was gone, and I remained silent, not wanting to start an argument in the first few minutes of the visit. Thanksgiving was about 2 hours away when I turned onto the main street of Colonial Beach. The town was already preparing for the holiday. Holiday decorations were in the windows of houses, posters of turkeys and corn on the cob hung from lampposts, and the parking lots of supermarkets were packed with cars of late shoppers. I stopped at a small shopping center on the outskirts. I wanted to buy another gift for Piper besides the telescope, something more personal, maybe a book. But I had no idea what she liked to read. A doll? At 10, do girls still play with dolls? Or do they already consider themselves too old for that? Wandering between the shelves of the toy store, I felt helpless. Around me, parents were confidently choosing gifts for their children, knowing their preferences, interests, dreams. And I stood at a loss in front of a rack of plush animals, not knowing if my granddaughter had a favorite animal. The last time I'd seen Piper was 8 months ago, at our neighbor Mrs. Henderson's funeral. Rebecca and Owen had come more out of courtesy. The old lady had once been Owen's elementary school teacher. They stayed as long as propriety demanded and left immediately after the ceremony, declining an invitation to the memorial dinner. Piper was then wearing a strict black dress with a lace collar, her hair pulled back into a tight bundle. She held on to her mother's hand and was silent the entire time, occasionally casting curious glances at me. When I tried to speak to her, Rebecca intervened. "Piper has a math test tomorrow. We can't stay late." In that brief encounter, I noticed my granddaughter tense as her mother squeezed her shoulder, a silent warning. And I also noticed that the girl wasn't smiling. Not at all. Her face remained serious and focused, even when one of the guests tried to make a joke. As we left the cemetery, Owen said to me, "Next time we'll call ahead, Dad. We're really in a hurry today." There was no next time. I remembered another episode, Christmas 5 years ago, the last holiday Elaine and I had spent together. Owen and Rebecca were still living in Richmond at the time and had agreed to come over for dinner. Piper was only 5. She had just started pre-kindergarten. Elaine baked gingerbread, decorated the house with garlands, and pulled out the old Christmas tree toys we'd collected all our lives. Under the tree were presents wrapped in brightly colored paper. She and I were as excited as teenagers on a first date, getting ready to meet our granddaughter. They were 2 hours late. Rebecca immediately started complaining about traffic and snowy roads. Owen was constantly answering work calls. Piper sat quietly on the couch looking at our old pictures on the walls. Elaine tried to engage her in conversation. "Honey, do you want me to show you how to make snowflakes out of paper? Your daddy used to love it when he was your age." Rebecca immediately intervened. "Piper is taking origami lessons with a professional instructor. She already knows how to fold 3-dimensional shapes." "It's just fun," Elaine said softly. "We try not to waste time on useless activities," Rebecca cut her off. "At her age, it's important to develop real skills." When it came to gifts, Piper thanked us politely for the storybook, but I could see Rebecca's lips tighten. Later, I heard her whisper to Owen, "Really? Fairy tales?" She's already reading encyclopedias. At dinner, Rebecca barely touched Elaine's casserole, citing diet. Owen ate a little more, but constantly praised the restaurants they usually dined at. Piper ate in small bites, occasionally glancing at her mother as if seeking approval. When they left, Elaine cried, "They're taking away her childhood, Terry," she said. Turning her into a little robot. I snapped out of my reverie, realizing that I'd been standing in front of a shelf of stuffed toys for several minutes, clutching a stuffed panda. The decision came out of the blue. I bought this panda, a big one, with a good-natured face and soft fur, the kind you can hug when you're scared or sad. Maybe it was too childish a gift for a 10-year-old girl. Maybe Rebecca would find it inappropriate. But something told me that this was exactly what Piper needed. Something simple, warm, not requiring achievement or perfection. After paying, I went back to the car and put the panda in the back seat next to the telescope. Then I started the engine and headed toward my son's house. The neighborhood where Owen lived was separated from the rest of the city by a wrought iron fence with a guard booth. I gave my name and my son's address, and they let me through without question. Apparently, Owen hadn't put me on his list of unwanted guests. That's something. His house stood at the end of a winding driveway, partially hidden by ornamental pine trees. Wreaths of holly branches adorned the front. Wooden figures of turkeys and pilgrims stood on the lawn, and candles burned in every window. It looked like a Christmas card, except instead of snowmen, it was Thanksgiving symbols. I parked a little to the side, not wanting to attract attention early. Several expensive cars were already parked in the driveway. A black Lexus, a silver Mercedes, a brand new BMW. Apparently, the reception was in full swing. Sitting in the car, I suddenly felt uncertain. What am I doing? Showing up uninvited to a private party? This isn't an 80s sitcom where the eccentric father shows up at the most inopportune moment and ends up hugging and laughing. This is real life, where people have their own plans, their own ideas about how the party should go. Do I have the right to barge into their lives just because I was once the father of one of them? But I'm still a father and a grandfather, and I have a right to see my family, especially on Thanksgiving. I took my time getting out of the car. Through the large French windows, I could see the interior of the living room, the rich furnishings, the holiday decorations, the figures of people moving with glasses in their hands. Everything looked perfect, flawless, like the pages of an interior design magazine. I could make out Rebecca, slim in a tight-fitting dark red dress, with her trademark TV smile. She was saying something to a group of guests who were listening intently. Owen stood nearby, tall and trim, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, occasionally inserting his comments into his wife's story. They looked like the perfect couple, successful, handsome, confident. None of the guests had any idea that they hadn't visited Owen's dying mother, that they hadn't invited his father to Thanksgiving, that their own daughter was a trophy to them, not a child. Where is Piper herself? I peered through the windows, but I couldn't make out a small figure among the adults. Maybe she's in her room, or with the other children in some separate part of the house. As a child, Owen had loved Thanksgiving. Elaine would let him help in the kitchen. He loved kneading the mashed potatoes and tasting the pie filling. We'd have family games, watch the parade on TV, and then the traditional soccer game. It was a day when we felt like a real family, bonded not only by blood, but by shared joys and shared traditions. What is left of those traditions now? Apparently for Owen, Thanksgiving has turned into another opportunity to impress colleagues and make useful connections. A business dinner disguised as a family holiday. I wasn't optimistic about my son's reaction to my appearance. Surprise, embarrassment, maybe even anger. Rebecca would definitely be furious. I'd disrupt her perfectly planned reception. But for Piper's sake, I was willing to endure their displeasure. For the chance to see my granddaughter, to give her a little joy. With trembling hands, I pulled a bottle of blood pressure pills from the glove compartment and swallowed one, drinking the rest of the cold coffee from the cup. At my age, it was bad to be nervous, but I couldn't help it. My heart was pounding like a young lieutenant's before his first combat mission. I was about to get out of the car when I noticed some movement on the side of the house. There was a small terrace overlooking the garden, and a glass door leading apparently from the kitchen. The door opened and a woman in an apron came out onto the terrace. Must have been the cook hired for the party. She was holding something in her hands, a bowl of garbage, I think, and quickly emptied it into a container at the edge of the terrace. But that's not what caught my attention. Behind the cook, a small figure in a light-colored dress slipped out onto the terrace. Even from a distance, I recognized Piper. It was as if she wanted to say something to the woman, but she'd already gone back inside, leaving the girl alone on the cold terrace. Something was wrong. Piper was dressed too lightly for this weather, just a thin dress, no coat or even a sweater. She wrapped her arms around herself, clearly freezing, but she didn't hurry back into the house. Instead, she walked slowly down the terrace to the garden and went to the far side of it, where there was a garden bench under a bare oak tree. Instinctively, I reached for the doorknob, but stopped myself. Maybe she had just gone out for some fresh air. Maybe she'd come back inside. No need to jump to conclusions. But Piper didn't come back. She sat down on the bench, pulling her knees up to her chest in an attempt to keep warm, and froze there, a small, lonely figure against the snow-covered garden. My granddaughter sat in the cold, shivering in the cold, while her parents entertained guests in the warm house. Something cold and heavy settled in my chest. It wasn't just disappointment or resentment, it was rage. Pure, burning rage that I hadn't felt in years. How could they? How could they leave a child out in this cold? I climbed out of the car, forgetting about the telescope and the plush panda, and headed for the garden gate. I no longer doubted my right to be here. I was not an intruder now, but a grandfather who saw that his granddaughter was in trouble. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked to the garden gate. The wind picked up, whipping me back, as if agreeing with my decision. I quickly found an inconspicuous wooden door in the hedge and pushed it open. It was unlocked. Owen's garden looked like a glossy magazine set. Perfectly trimmed bushes, marble statues, elegant garden furniture under protective covers. Even now, in late November, everything was impeccably tended. Surely the work of a professional gardener. Owen had never liked to mess around in the ground, unlike his mother. Piper was still sitting on the bench under the oak tree, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her light-colored dress seemed an inappropriate stain against the gray-white winter landscape. She didn't notice me, absorbed in her own thoughts, so I could get a better look at her. She'd grown since the last time I'd seen her. Her blonde hair braided into an elaborate braid hung over her shoulder. Her facial features had become more defined. Rebecca's high cheekbones, but my chin inherited through Owen. She was a beautiful child, but her face looked too serious for a 10-year-old. And that seriousness, that tenseness seemed wrong, unnatural. I didn't want to scare her, so I coughed as I took a few steps closer. Piper flinched and lifted her head. Her eyes widened with fright, but then recognition flashed in them. "Grandpa?" Her voice sounded uncertain, as if she wasn't entirely convinced it was really me. "Hello, Piper," I smiled, trying to sound calm despite the anger bubbling inside. "I thought I'd surprise you for Thanksgiving." She didn't smile back, just wrapped her arms tighter around herself, trying to keep warm. "Mom and Dad didn't say you were coming. They didn't know. I wanted to surprise you." I stepped closer and noticed that her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and little ice crystals had frozen on her eyelashes. She was crying, and her tears had frozen in the cold. Without thinking, I took off my coat and threw it over her shoulders. "What are you doing outside in this cold, baby? And why are you dressed so lightly?" Piper lowered her eyes as if she was embarrassed. "Dash, I can't go back inside. Mommy said I have to think about my behavior." "What behavior?" I sat down next to her, feeling the cold from the marble bench seep through my pants. She was silent for a moment, rubbing the edge of my coat, which was enormous. "I broke the vase," she finally said in a low voice. "The one they'd brought back from Italy. I was helping to arrange the flowers for the guests, and it slipped out of my hands." Mommy was very angry. "And that's why she sent you outside?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but my insides were churning. At first, I just stood in the corner in the living room. But then the first guest came over, and my mom said I was ruining everyone's mood with my miserable appearance. Piper swallowed. She said I could come back when I learned to smile and not embarrass the family. I felt my breath catch with rage. Putting a child out in the cold because of an accidentally broken vase? Because of a face that wasn't happy enough? How long have you been sitting here? Piper shrugged, and the gesture looked so mature, so resigned. I don't know. The guests started coming in at 2 o'clock. I guess it must be 4 now? I looked at the clock. It was 5:30. She'd been out in the cold for over 2 hours. Let's go inside, I said, getting up. You could get sick. Piper shook her head, and I could see the fear in her eyes. No. Mom would be even more angry. She said I could only come back when she said I could. Piper, I got down on one knee in front of her so our eyes were level. You're shivering from the cold. It's -17 outside. No one has the right to keep you out in the cold. Not even your parents. It's dangerous. But my mom said, I'll talk to your mom, I interrupted. But first we need to keep you warm. I saw her squinting fearfully at the house, and I realized that she was really scared at the prospect of disobeying her mother. What had they done to her? What kind of threats and punishments had brought a child to this state? You know what? I suggested, changing tactics. Let's go to my car first. I brought you some presents. It worked. A glimmer of interest flashed in her eyes, and she let me take her hand. Her fingers were icy cold, and I rubbed them gently in my palms. What presents? She asked as we walked to the gate. It's a surprise, but I think you'll like it. We walked out of the garden area and headed for my car. Piper walked slowly, as if her legs were stiff from sitting out in the cold for so long. I supported her, mentally cursing my son and his wife for what they had done to my granddaughter. When I got to the car, I put Piper in the front seat and turned the heater on full blast. Then I pulled a stuffed panda in a telescope out of the back seat. Happy Thanksgiving, I said, handing her the gifts. She looked at them with incredulous surprise, as if she couldn't believe these were really for her. The panda in particular seemed to puzzle her. Is it for me? She asked, hesitating to touch the toy. Of course it's for you. Who else would it be for? Piper picked up the panda carefully, as if it might fall apart at her touch. Then she held it to her chest, burying her face in the soft fur. Something in that gesture, in the way she hugged the plush toy desperately, broke my heart. Thank you, she whispered into the panda. It's so soft. And this is a telescope. I pointed to the second box. When I was your age, I loved to look at the stars. I thought you might like it. Piper carefully put the panda aside and picked up the telescope. Her face showed genuine curiosity. I read about constellations in an encyclopedia, she said. There were maps of them, but I've never really seen them. We can set it up tonight if the sky clears, I suggested. I'll show you the Big Dipper, Orion, and the Pleiades. You'll love it. For a moment, her face lit up with a smile, the first real smile I'd ever seen on her. But then she remembered something, and the smile faded. Mommy won't let me, she said quietly. She says astronomy isn't practical. She wants me to focus on sciences that will help me get into a good university. I felt the anger boiling up inside again. Piper, astronomy is a science too, one of the oldest and most beautiful. And you know what? Sometimes we do things not because they are practical, but because they bring us joy. She looked at me with such surprise, as if I had said something revolutionary. Had no one ever told her that she was entitled to joy? To a childhood? We sat in the car for a few more minutes, letting the warmth of the heater dispel the cold in her body. The color slowly returned to her cheeks, and she stopped shivering so much. All the while, she kept the panda in her arms, occasionally burying her face in the soft fur as if trying to hide from the world. Grandpa, she finally said, are you really going to talk to Mommy? She'll be very angry. Don't worry about it. I stroked her head. I'll deal with your parents. They don't want you to come, she said suddenly with disarming directness. I heard my dad telling my mom that you're too, she stammered, trying to remember the exact word, provincial for their circle. That should have hurt me, but I just hummed. You know, Piper, sometimes adults say stupid things, even your parents. She nodded with sudden seriousness, as if she'd come to that conclusion on her own a long time ago. I missed you, she said suddenly, and my grandmother. She always baked chocolate chip cookies for me. She loved you very much, I swallowed the lump in my throat. And I love you too, Piper. Even if we don't see each other much. She pressed herself against me, still holding the panda, and I hugged her, feeling her little body flush against mine. In that moment, I swore to myself that I would never leave her again. Never let them hurt her again. It's time to go back inside, I said when I realized she was fully warmed up. And this time, no one will send you out in the cold. I promise. Piper nodded reluctantly. She took the panda and the telescope, and we got out of the car. This time, instead of the garden gate, we headed for the front door. I wanted Owen and Rebecca to see me in full view so they would have nowhere to hide from my anger. As we approached the house, I could hear the sounds of merriment from outside the door more and more clearly. Laughter, music, glasses clinking. The party was in full swing, and all the while Piper sat out in the cold, forgotten and punished for a non-existent transgression. I pressed the doorbell. The sound rang inside the house, but no one rushed to open it. I pressed again, longer and more insistently. Finally, a young woman in a waitress uniform opened the door. "What can I do for you?" she asked, giving me an appraising look. "I'm Owen Bolton's father," I said, "and this is his daughter, Piper." The woman frowned, shifting her gaze from me to Piper. Miss Piper should be in her room." "As you can see, she wasn't," I interrupted. "She was outside in the cold for 2 hours, on her mother's orders." The waitress turned pale. "Yeah, I didn't know. Please come in. I'll let Mr. and Mrs. Bolton know." We entered the spacious hallway. Inside, the house looked even more impressive than outside. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier, antique furniture. On the walls hung modern paintings in minimalist frames. Probably expensive, judging by the way they were displayed. There were voices and laughter coming from the living room. I could make out Rebecca's voice. She was telling a story, and the guests laughed politely in all the right places. The waitress was hesitating at the entrance to the living room, clearly hesitant to interrupt her hostess. "I'll get it," I said, stepping around her. Piper squeezed my hand tighter. "Grandfather, maybe you shouldn't," she whispered. But I had already crossed the threshold of the living room. The room was full of people. I counted about 20 guests. All of them were dressed to the hilt. Men in expensive suits, women in exquisite dresses. On the table were silver candelabras, crystal glasses, porcelain plates with exquisite appetizers. In the center was a huge roasted turkey decorated with herbs and berries. Rebecca stood by the fireplace with a wine glass in her hand. Her impeccably styled blonde hair glistened in the candlelight, her makeup emphasizing her correct facial features. Beside her, leaning against the mantelpiece, stood Owen in a dark blue suit with a perfectly tied tie. They looked like a picture from an advertisement for luxury living. My appearance didn't immediately attract attention, but when Piper followed me in, all eyes turned to us. There was an awkward silence. Rebecca was the first to realize it. Her face contorted with shock and anger for a moment, but she quickly regained control and put on a fake smile. "Daddy, what a surprise!" She came to me with open arms, as if she was genuinely happy to see me. "We weren't expecting you today." Owen looked less ready to play. His face paled, his eyes darting between me and Piper, still holding the plush panda and the telescope. "Shaktononum." "Piper, dear," Rebecca continued, ignoring her daughter, "why don't you go to your room and change for dinner?" Her voice sounded soft, but her eyes threw lightning bolts. "And what are these toys?" "They're presents from Grandpa," Piper replied quietly, holding the panda tighter to her. "That's sweet," Rebecca said through a smile. "But this is no time for games. We have company. The same guests you threw your daughter out in the cold for?" I didn't try to hide the rage in my voice. The room fell silent again. A few of the guests exchanged awkward glances. "I don't know what you mean," Rebecca laughed nervously. Piper was in her room getting ready for dinner. "Don't lie," my voice came out louder than I intended. "I found her in the garden where she'd spent the last 2 hours. In the cold. In a dress." Owen finally died down and came over to us. "Dad, let's discuss this somewhere else," he said, trying to lead me out of the room. "You're misreading the situation." I shook his hand off my shoulder. "Misunderstood? Your daughter was sitting on a bench under an oak tree, frozen to her blue lips. She was being punished for accidentally breaking a vase. What exactly did I misunderstand? One of the guests, an elderly man with a gray beard, coughed. Perhaps we'd better leave, he said, rising. You seem to have family business. No, no, Rebecca tried to salvage the situation. Just a little misunderstanding. Piper was supposed to be in her room, and she must have slipped out without our knowledge. You're lying, I couldn't keep my voice down again. You kicked her out, saying she could come back when she learned to smile and not embarrass the family. A whisper ran through the room. The guests were clearly uncomfortable, and many began to rise, preparing to leave. Owen, your wife jeopardized your daughter's health, I turned to my son, and you let it happen. What became of you? How could you? Owen's face contorted with anger and shame. You have no right to barge into my house and make a scene in front of my guests, he hissed. You have no idea how to raise children in today's world. Your outdated methods. Outdated? I didn't let him finish. Outdated methods? Is it to love your child, to take care of him, not to put him out in the cold for a broken vase? If that's outdated, I'm happy to be outdated. By this point, most of the guests were already gathering their belongings, hurrying to leave the unpleasant scene. Rebecca, seeing her perfect reception crumbling, threw all her energies into saving the situation. Friends, please don't go. She tried to hold the guests back. It's just a misunderstanding. Piper, tell everyone you're okay. All eyes turned to the girl, who was still standing, clutching the panda to her chest. Her face had turned pale with fear, but there was something new in her eyes, a spark of determination. My mom punished me and put me outside, she said in a quiet but firm voice. I broke the vase by accident, but she said I ruined everything, always. There was dead silence in the room. Rebecca glared at her daughter with undisguised fury. Owen shifted his gaze from his wife to his daughter, clearly unsure of what to do. I'm taking Piper with me, I said, putting my arm around my granddaughter's shoulders. She's staying with me until you learn to be parents, not jailers. You have no right. Rebecca stepped forward. She's our daughter. The daughter you made freezing outside while you yourself enjoyed turkey and wine? I didn't back down. The daughter you're punishing for not being perfect enough for your perfect world? Enough, Owen stepped between us. You're out of line, Dad. I'm asking you to leave. Now. I looked him straight in the eyes, so similar to my own, but cold and alien. No, son. You're the one who's out of line. You and your wife. You're emotionally abusing your daughter. My voice rang out in the silence. You're denying her the love that should be unconditional. You're putting your reputation and comfort before her well-being. And worst of all, you think it's okay. Rebecca's face contorted with anger and humiliation. Owen stood pale, with jowls walking up and down his cheekbones. You may be my father, he hissed, but you have no right to tell me how to raise my daughter. When a child is in danger, every adult has that right and responsibility. I didn't back down. Piper could have gotten frostbite. What if she had gotten pneumonia? Did you think about that? The last guest slipped quietly out of the room. No one wanted to witness a family scandal. The waiters delicately disappeared into the kitchen. Soon it was just the four of us. Me, Piper, Owen, and Rebecca. You ruined everything, Rebecca glared at me with unconcealed hatred. I spent months preparing this reception. Do you have any idea what's going to be the talk of the town now? I don't care what the town will say. I cut her off. I care about my granddaughter's health and safety. Piper was still standing next to me, clutching the stuffed panda tightly to her chest. Her face was pale, but she was no longer trembling, and there was a new expression in her eyes, a mixture of relief and fear of what was to come. Piper, honey, I turned to her, trying to speak softly. Why don't you go to your room and change into warm clothes? We'll talk to your parents, and then I'll come by your room, okay? She nodded uncertainly, cast a wary glance at her parents, and walked slowly toward the stairs leading to the second floor. And take your presents with you, I added with a smile. Rebecca jerked as if she wanted to stop her daughter, but held back under my hard stare. When Piper was out of sight, she turned to me. Why did you bring her this toy? She said the word toy with such disdain, as if it were something obscene. Owen and I are trying to cultivate her intellectual interests. She's a child, I shook my head. Children play with stuffed toys. It's normal. Maybe it's normal in your provincial world, Rebecca countered, But Piper isn't a normal kid. She has a special path. We're preparing her for a distinguished career. At the expense of her childhood? I grinned bitterly. Congratulations. You've really made your mark. I've never seen a 10-year-old look so unhappy. Owen walked over to the bar and poured himself a whiskey. He seemed lost, as if he didn't know what to make of the situation. Dad, he finally said, taking a sip, you've always been a difficult man. Mom somehow managed to deal with your temper. But I just can't. I have my own life, my own principles. Principles? I could barely contain my anger. What principle justifies letting your wife put your daughter out in the cold? He averted his eyes. I didn't know Piper was outside. I thought she was in her room. You're lying. I looked him straight in the eye. You've always been a terrible liar, Owen. Rebecca could have sent Piper outside, but you knew about it and did nothing. Something resembling shame flashed across his face, but he quickly got over himself. Piper needs discipline. Rebecca's just stricter than me on these things. Stricter? I couldn't believe my ears. Calling cruelty strict is self-defeating, son. Rebecca snorted and poured herself a drink. Her perfect hair was a little disheveled, and her face was blotchy with anger. You old school people don't understand anything about modern parenting. She took a big sip of wine. The world has become competitive. If we don't prepare Piper now, she'll lose out in the future. Minus lose out on what? I raised my eyebrows in surprise. In the race for money and status? What about losing out on the ability to be happy, to love, to feel joy? Happiness doesn't pay the bills, Rebecca cut him off. But it makes life worth living, I argued. You're so fixated on success that you've forgotten what it's all about. Owen set the glass down on the table with a loud clatter. We're not going to listen to your moralizing, Dad. That's the way you've always been. You think you know best. That's why we're not inviting you. You judge everything we do. I condemn what deserves condemnation. I wasn't about to back down. When was the last time you saw Piper laugh? When was the last time she acted like a child instead of a little robot programmed to fulfill your expectations? They looked at each other, and in that moment I realized I had hit the mark. They really couldn't remember a time when their daughter was genuinely happy. She's happy in her own way, Owen said uncertainly. She's proud of her accomplishments. Achievements? Or the approval she gets for those accomplishments? I shook my head. It's not the same thing. Rebecca paced the room nervously, her heels clacking loudly on the marble floor. You don't realize what the world has in store for Piper, she said with irritation. Competition for places at the best universities starts in elementary school. If we don't prepare her now— To hell with universities, I interrupted. I'm talking about a child's health and happiness now today. Not 10 years from now. It's just a temporary hardship, Rebecca said. Then she'll be grateful for everything we've done for her. Or she'll hate you. I looked her straight in the eye. Children don't forget emotional traumas, Rebecca. They carry them with them their whole lives. Owen sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd adopted from me, though he probably didn't realize it himself. Okay, maybe the punishment was too harsh, he admitted reluctantly. But it was an isolated incident. Don't make a big deal out of it. An isolated incident? I raised an eyebrow skeptically. Really? Of course, he shrugged. We love Piper. We only want the best for her. I decided to test my hunch. What about the piano incident? I asked randomly. Was that an isolated incident too? Owen's face changed and I realized I'd hit the mark. Apparently there had been some incident involving a piano that I didn't know about. It was something else entirely. He looked away. She had to prepare for the competition. All kids get nervous before they perform. What did you do? My voice became quiet and threatening. Rebecca interjected. It was nothing. She was just deprived of dessert for a week for not learning a difficult passage. The usual educational influence. And the television, Owen added quietly. And books other than sheet music. And socializing with other kids. I stared at them in shock. You deprived a child of all the joys of life because she couldn't learn a difficult piece? She won first place in a competition, Rebecca said proudly. See? Our methods work. At what cost? I shook my head. Do you want her to be a world champion piano player or a happy person? Happiness is the province of the mediocre, Rebecca said. Great people are rarely happy. Bullshit, I couldn't help myself. It's an excuse for parents to cripple their children's psyches for their own ambitions. Owen suddenly pounded his fist on the table. Enough, he shouted. You come into my house and lecture me on how to raise my child? You who spent most of my childhood on military bases? Who missed my college graduation because of some stupid business trip? Who never paid as much attention to me as he did to his cadets? I was stunned by his sudden outburst. Did he really still hold a grudge against me for those long-ago times? Owen, I tried to speak calmly. Yes, I wasn't a perfect father. I've made mistakes, but I never punished you harshly, never took away our love. Your mom and I— Mom was different, he interrupted. She loved unconditionally, and you always expected more from me, always wanted me to be stronger, braver, better. There was some truth in what he said, and it hurt me. I was indeed a demanding father. But had my demands ever turned violent? I wanted the best for you, I said quietly, but I never put my unfulfilled dreams on you. I never punished you for being imperfect. No, he grinned bitterly. How about that time I didn't qualify for the soccer team? You said I didn't try hard enough. Because that was true, I shrugged. You quit practicing a month before tryouts. Of course you didn't pass, see? He looked triumphantly at Rebecca. Always criticism, never support. Criticism is not a lack of support, I countered. Real support isn't about praising a child for everything. It's about helping him to be better, but to love them no matter what happens. Rebecca hummed. Sounds like an excuse for parents who can't brag about their children's accomplishments. I looked at her puzzled. Do you really measure your daughter's worth by her accomplishments? To you, a child is a line on a resume? I want my daughter to be the best. Rebecca didn't look away. I want her to have all the opportunities I didn't have, so that she doesn't have to break through the glass ceiling with bloody scratches like I did. And then I realized Rebecca wasn't just the ambitious bitch I'd thought she was all those years ago. She was projecting her own traumas, her unrealized ambitions onto Piper. She wanted her daughter to win battles that Rebecca herself had lost, or in which she had paid too high a price to win. Piper is not your second attempt at life, I said more gently. She's a separate person with her own desires, fears, and dreams. Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes, but she quickly got over herself. It's a temporary inconvenience for the sake of long-term success, she repeated stubbornly. Someday she would understand and be grateful. If she doesn't break before then, I argued. Children aren't rubber, Rebecca. They break just like adults, sometimes even easier. Owen stared silently into his glass. My words seemed to have reached some part of his mind, but he wasn't ready to admit it. What do you want us to do? He finally asked. For us to apologize? Okay, I'm sorry. We were too hard on Piper today. It won't happen again. It won't happen again today, I corrected him. But tomorrow will be different. A new punishment for a new imperfection. You're exaggerating, Owen shook his head. We're not monsters. I want to talk to Piper, I said. Alone. And after that conversation, I'll decide what to do next. Do what? Rebecca looked up. What are you talking about? About whether it's safe for Piper to stay in this house. I was brutally honest. You have no right, Rebecca hissed. She's our daughter, and I'm her grandfather. I didn't back down. And if I see her well-being threatened, I'll do anything to protect her, even if it means going to Child Protective Services. The threat worked. Rebecca turned pale, apparently imagining the headlines in the local papers and the whispers in her TV studio. Owen looked alarmed too. You won't do it, he said uncertainly. It would destroy our reputation. I don't care about your reputation. I cut him off. I care about Piper. And if you really love your daughter, you should care about the same thing. I headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. Owen made a motion as if he wanted to stop me, but changed his mind. Piper's room is the third door on the right, he said instead. I walked up the wide marble staircase, thinking about what I just heard. Did Owen really think I was a bad father? Yes, I was strict. Yes, I had a demanding job that sometimes took me away from my family. But did I ever make him feel like my love depended on his accomplishments? The second-floor corridor was long and bright, with several doors on either side. I found the door indicated and knocked quietly. "Piper, it's Grandpa. Can I come in?" "Yes." Her voice sounded muffled. I opened the door and entered the room. It was large and bright, with a huge window overlooking the bay. But despite its size, the room seemed strangely impersonal. No posters on the walls, no toys scattered about, nothing to indicate that a child lived here. Just a neatly made bed, a study table, bookshelves filled with textbooks and encyclopedias, and an electronic piano in the corner. Piper sat on the edge of the bed, changed into a warm sweater and jeans. A plush panda lay beside her. A telescope stood on the floor by the bed. "How are you?" I asked, sitting down next to her. "Fine," she shrugged, but didn't look me in the eye. "Are they really mad?" "They're upset," I answered honestly. "But not because of you. It's because of me." She nodded as if she'd expected that answer. "Piper," I took her hand gently, "I want you to be honest with me. Do your parents often punish you like they did today?" She was silent for a long time, rubbing the sleeve of her sweater. "Not always like this," she said finally. "Sometimes it's different." "Different how?" "Sometimes my mom locks me in my room without dinner. Sometimes she forbids me to read anything but my textbooks. Once, when I didn't learn a piece for a competition, she wouldn't let me do anything but practice piano for a whole week." Piper spoke softly, monotonously, as if recounting something mundane. "And Dad, he usually just says he's disappointed in me, that I don't try hard enough." My heart clenched. This was even worse than I thought it would be. "Did they ever—" I didn't know how to ask this delicately. "Do they ever hit you?" Piper shook her head. "No. Mom says physical punishment is for uneducated people, that there are ways to punish without them. Small consolation, but at least it's something." "Do you like living here?" I asked her bluntly. She was silent again for a long time. Then she said quietly, "I try to be good. I really do. But I can't be what they want me to be." "What do they want you to be?" "The best at everything." She looked up at me. "In school, in music, in dance, in French. Mom says second place is the first place among losers." I sighed. What a monstrous psychological burden for a child. "What do you want, Piper?" I asked gently. "Not your parents, but you?" She looked puzzled, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. "Yeah, I don't know," she finally admitted. "I've never thought about it." "What would you do if you could do whatever you wanted all day long?" She thought for a moment, then said uncertainly, "I'd read books. Not textbooks, but just books, stories, and maybe draw. I like to draw, but my mom says it's a waste of time. Do you like music?" I nodded at the piano. "Not really," she shook her head. "I mean, I like listening to music, but not playing scales for hours. It's, exhausting." I could see that it was hard for her to admit it, like she was betraying her parents by telling the truth. "Piper," I gently put my arm around her shoulders, "I want you to know that it's okay to be yourself. Not being the best at everything is okay. It's okay to make mistakes, to break vases, to dislike the piano. It's okay. Do you understand?" She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't fully believe me. "Grandpa, are you really going to go to the police?" she suddenly asked. "I heard you telling Mom and Dad." "Not the police." I shook my head. "Child Protective Services. But only if it's necessary." "Please don't," she suddenly grabbed my arm. "They'll get more angry. And what will happen to me? Will they take me to an orphanage?" I saw the fear in her eyes and realized that I had scared her by threatening her parents. Of course, she didn't want to end up in an orphanage, no matter how miserable her current situation was. "No, honey," I stroked her head soothingly. "There are no orphanages. If you can't stay here, I'll take care of you. You can live with me." "Really?" There was disbelief in her voice. "Of course. I'm your grandfather. It's my job to take care of you." She hugged the panda as if looking for support. "Sure, Jacob, but I don't want Mommy and Daddy to get in trouble." "I understand." I nodded. "Let's do this. I'll talk to them again. Maybe they'll realize they were wrong and change their attitude toward you. But if they don't, we'll find another solution. I promise I won't leave you. I didn't know if I could keep that promise, but I was determined to do my best. In the few hours I'd spent with Piper, I'd seen enough to know that she couldn't stay in that house, with these people who were slowly killing everything childlike, everything alive and real in her. I'll be back in a few minutes, I said, getting up. I need to talk to your parents again. She nodded, not letting go of the panda. When I was already at the door, she suddenly asked, Grandpa, did Grandma really bake chocolate chip cookies? I smiled, feeling a lump come up to my throat. Yes, the best cookies in the world. You know what? I'll teach you how to bake one just like it. I have her recipe. For the first time all day, I saw a real smile on her face, tentative, shy, but sincere. I left the room, quietly closing the door behind me, and leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. The anger I'd felt earlier was replaced by a cold determination. I'm not going to let Owen and Rebecca continue to ruin my granddaughter's life, no matter what it takes. Going downstairs, I found them in the living room. They were sitting at the table, Rebecca tapping her fingernails nervously on the tabletop. Owen smoking, a habit I thought he'd kicked long ago. Well, Rebecca looked up at me tensely. Did you tell her anything bad about us? I don't need to say anything, I said calmly. She knows everything. I sat down across from them, collecting my thoughts. I've made my decision, I said finally. Piper is not staying in this house. Not for tonight, anyway. I'm taking her with me. Owen and Rebecca reacted to my statement exactly as I'd expected, with anger and threats. You have no right. Rebecca jumped up from her chair. What? This is kidnapping. It's taking care of a child, I argued calmly, though I was seething inside. You've proven you're incapable of providing Piper with a safe and healthy environment. Owen put out his cigarette in the ashtray and looked at me with cold fury. If you take her away, I'll call the police. Call them, I shrugged, and I'll tell them how your daughter spent 2 hours in the cold as punishment. I'm sure they'll be interested. It was a bluff, but they bought it. I could see in their faces that they were calculating the possible consequences. Scandal in the papers, whispers behind their backs, ruined careers. Their reputations meant too much to them. Son, it's only temporary, I softened my tone. Give Piper a break from you, and you need to think about your behavior for the weekend. Then we'll discuss what to do next. 2 days, Rebecca said sharply after a pause, and she should be back by Monday. She has French class in the morning. I felt a grim satisfaction. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she was more concerned with her French class than with her daughter's emotional state. We'll see, I replied evasively. Right now, help her pack her things. Owen clenched his fists but held back. You always were a self-righteous bastard, Dad, he said quietly. Always thought you knew best. But this time you've gone too far. No, son, I shook my head. You went too far, and not for the first time. Rebecca gave me one last venomous look and went upstairs to help Piper pack. Owen and I stayed in the living room in awkward silence. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where was the sensitive boy who cried over a wounded bird? Where was the teenager who said he wanted to make a difference in the world? When had he turned into this cold, calculating man for whom reputation was more important than the happiness of his own child? You know, I finally said, you remind me of my father. Owen looked up at me in surprise. Grandfather Bertram? But you always said he was a tyrant, I finished for him, a man who measured people by their accomplishments and status, who was never satisfied with what he had or who he was. I swore I would never be that kind of father, and I tried. Maybe not always successfully, but I tried. Owen turned away, unwilling to listen. It's different, he muttered. Times have changed. Times always change, I agreed. But children are always children. They need love and security and support. That's the same. He didn't answer. A few minutes later, Rebecca came downstairs with a small bag. Here are her things, she threw the bag on the floor. I hope you know what you're doing, Terrence. I do, I nodded, for the first time in a long time. Piper came down the stairs, clutching her stuffed panda tightly to her chest. She carried the telescope in her other hand, as if she were afraid to leave the presents in the house. I'm ready, Grandpa, she said quietly. I could see that Rebecca wanted to say something, but she held back. Instead, she nodded coldly to her daughter. Listen to Grandpa, and don't forget to repeat the words by Monday. No hugs, no, I'll miss you, no call me if you need anything. Just another reminder about class. Owen walked over to his daughter and awkwardly rubbed her shoulder. I'll see you Monday, little girl. Be a good girl. Piper nodded without looking up. I wanted to grab them both by the scruff of the neck and shake them both so they could see what they were doing to their own child, but I held back. The main thing now was to get Piper out of this house, to let her breathe freely. I grabbed my bag and the telescope, Piper following me, holding the panda tightly. We walked out onto the porch without looking back. There were sparse snowflakes swirling in the air, but the main snowfall had stopped. It was getting darker, and the streetlights were on, casting a warm glow on the snow-covered lawns. It's going to be okay, I said as we got into the car. I promise. Piper nodded but didn't say anything. She stared out the window at the house, and I couldn't tell if she was relieved or afraid of the unknown. I started the engine, and we pulled away. As we drove away from Owen's house, I could feel the tension slowly leaving my body. But then came the realization. What next? I didn't have a concrete plan. I couldn't take Piper to Richmond right away. The drive was too long, and it had been a long day. We both needed a rest. You know what? I said. Let's find a nice motel for the night. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do next. Piper nodded in agreement. She looked tired, but not as tense as before. We drove out of the upscale neighborhood and headed toward downtown Colonial Beach. I knew there was a pretty decent motel there, just off the main street. I'd stayed there on my last visit. Not 5-star, of course, but clean and cozy. The drive took about 15 minutes. Piper was silent the whole time, staring out the window at the Thanksgiving-decorated houses floating by. I didn't bother her, realizing she needed time to process what had happened. The Seaside Motel was a 2-story G-shaped building with a parking lot in the courtyard. A neon sign blinked welcomingly in the darkness. I parked near the administration office. Wait here. I'll get us a room, I said to Piper. She nodded, keeping the panda in her arms. At the front desk sat an older woman with gray hair gathered into a neat bundle. She looked up from her book as I entered. Good evening, she greeted me. What can I do for you? I need a room for 2, I said. For me and my granddaughter. For 1 night, maybe 2. The woman nodded, showing no surprise. We have a spare room with 2 beds on the 2nd floor. Bay view, very quiet. Sounds great, I pulled out my wallet. How much do I owe you? After getting the necessary paperwork and a key, I walked back to the car. Piper was still sitting there, cradling her panda and looking out the window. We have a room overlooking the bay, I said, trying to sound cheerful. You'll love it. We grabbed our things and went up the outside stairs to the 2nd floor. The room was simple but clean. 2 single beds covered with nautical-themed bedspreads, a small table by the window, a TV on the wall, a small refrigerator, and a microwave in the corner. The window did have a view of the bay, a dark mass of water backlit by moonlight. Make yourself comfortable. I placed my bag on one of the beds. You must be hungry. It's Thanksgiving, and we haven't even had dinner. Piper nodded uncertainly. A little. Let me go get us something. I saw a convenience store on the corner. Okay. She sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the panda. I left the room feeling strangely awkward. What am I doing? Taking the kid away from her parents, staying in a motel with her, and now what? What's my plan? I knew I had acted impulsively, but I couldn't do anything else. Leaving Piper in that house would be a betrayal, both to her and to Elaine's memory. At the store, I bought sandwiches, fruit, cookies, milk, and juice. At the checkout, I added a deck of cards. Thought we might need some entertainment. When I got back to the room, Piper was sitting on the windowsill looking out over the bay. She turned when she heard the door open. Brought us an impromptu Thanksgiving dinner, I said, setting the purchases on the table. Not turkey, of course, but it should satisfy our hunger. Piper climbed down from the windowsill and walked over to the table. We sat across from each other and began to eat. At first in silence, but gradually the atmosphere became less tense. You know, I said, unwrapping my sandwich, when your dad was a kid, We spent Thanksgiving in a motel once, too. Got stuck in a blizzard on the way to Grandma's sister's house. Ate sandwiches and chips out of a vending machine. Really? Piper looked surprised. Dad never told me. He was about your age then. We played cards all night, and I let him stay up late. He was thrilled. Piper smiled, faintly but sincerely. And these cards? Interim, she nodded at the deck I'd placed on the table. I thought you might want to play. Do you know how? A little, she shrugged. Daddy plays drunk with me sometimes when Mommy's not home. I raised my eyebrows. Secretly from Mom? Piper nodded. She says cards are a waste of time, that I should be doing something educational. Well, I guess a little waste of time never hurt anyone. I winked at her, especially on Thanksgiving. After dinner, we played a few games of drinking, then fishing. Gradually, Piper began to thaw, laughing when I was dramatically lamenting my loss, and even teasing me a little when she was winning. Grandpa, she suddenly asked when we took a break from the game, do you really think Mom and Dad are bad parents? I sighed, fumbling for words. Despite everything, she loved them, and I didn't want to break that bond. I think they care for you in their own way, I finally said. But their methods, they can hurt you, even if they don't realize it. Piper twirled a strand of hair around her finger thoughtfully, a gesture I remembered from Elaine. My mom says she loves me, but sometimes, she stammered, sometimes it doesn't seem like she loves me. But what I could become, or should become, that was a remarkably astute observation for a 10-year-old. Sakura, you're a very smart girl, Piper, I said with a smile. And you know what? You have a right to be you. Not who they want you to be, but who you are. She was silent for a moment as she considered my words. And you? She finally asked me. Do you love me as I am? Yes, I answered without hesitation. I don't even know you that well, but I love you already. And I want to get to know you better. The real you, not the version your parents are trying to create. She smiled real, big smile, and for the first time I saw her as the carefree girl she should have been all along. You know, she said suddenly, I never told my mom, but I want to be a writer. Not a pianist, not a scientist, but a writer. I like to make up stories. You do? I was genuinely interested. What do you write about? About all sorts of things, she shrugged. About a girl who finds a magic door in her closet. About a kitten who can talk, but only at night. About a ghost who is more afraid of people than people are afraid of him. That sounds wonderful, I smiled. I'd love to read your stories. Would you? Her eyes lit up. Mom never reads. She says she doesn't have time for fiction. I do have time, I assured her. And I love a good story. We talked for another hour or so. Piper told me about her school, about her few friends. Rebecca was careful to choose who she could hang out with. About how she was sometimes allowed to walk in the park, but only if she had completed all her assignments and classes. My mom makes a schedule for me every day, she said, from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., even on weekends. Do you always follow it? I asked, knowing the answer. I try, she lowered her eyes, but sometimes I pretend to do homework while I write stories, or just staring out the window and daydreaming. It's okay, I stroked her arm. Everyone needs time to daydream. Slowly, I could see the fatigue overtaking her. It had been a long day, and the emotional strain was taking its toll. I think it's time for both of us to go to bed, I said, glancing at the clock. It was almost 11. Tomorrow would be another day. Piper nodded, yawning. She took her pajamas out of her bag and went into the bathroom to change. When she returned, I'd already made both beds. Which one do you want? I asked. Could I have the one closest to the window? Sure. She climbed under the covers, cradling the panda against her chest. I turned off the overhead light, leaving only the small lamp on the table. Grandpa, she called softly as I was about to lie down. What about tomorrow? I sat down on the edge of her bed. No. Tomorrow we'll go to my house in Richmond, spend the weekend together, and then we'll figure out what to do next. Mom will be very angry if I'm not back by Monday. The fear was back in her voice. Don't worry about that now. I stroked her head. Everything will be fine, I promise. She nodded, not looking completely convinced, but too tired to argue. A few minutes later, she was asleep, still clutching the panda in her arms. I looked at her, so small and vulnerable, and felt the determination growing in me. I couldn't let her go back to that toxic environment, but I also realized I couldn't just take her away without legal repercussions. I needed a plan. After making sure Piper was sound asleep, I went out on the balcony with my phone. The night air was cool and crisp, with stars shining in the sky. I dialed a number I hadn't dialed in months. Hello? My sister Lynn's voice sounded wary, not surprising considering the late hour. Hi, Lynn, I said. Sorry for the late call. It's Terrence. Terry? I could hear the surprise in her voice. Is something wrong? Yeah, you could say that. I took a deep breath and began to tell her everything that had happened. The visit with Owen, Piper in the cold, the confrontation, and our escape. Lynn listened in silence, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. She'd always been like that, calm, judicious, the opposite of my fiery nature. What do you plan to do next? She asked when I finished my story. Honestly? I don't know, I admitted. I can't just put her back there, Lynn. You should have seen her eyes when she told me about her life. It's not normal. But you can't just take the kid away from her parents, Terry. That's not how it works. I know, I rubbed my forehead. That's why I'm calling you. You've always been smarter than me. What do I do? Lynn hesitated. I could hear her drumming her fingers on the table, a habit from her childhood when she was deep in thought. First of all, she finally said, you need legal advice. I can call Haley, remember her? She's my neighbor, she's a family lawyer. That would be great, I said with relief. Secondly, you need proof, not just your word against theirs. Do you have anything to corroborate the abuse, I wondered? I had no pictures of Piper in the cold, no record of their punishments. Wouldn't Piper's testimony be enough? It would help, but courts are usually wary of children's testimony. They might think you turned her against her parents. Shit, I muttered. What are we going to do? Look, Lynn's voice softened. Bring her here to Charlottesville. I have plenty of room, and Maggie will be happy to play with her cousin. Maggie, Lynn's daughter, was a year older than Piper, but they barely knew each other. Another consequence of our family's estrangement. Are you sure? I asked. This could take a while. I'm sure, she said firmly. We're family, Terry. Maybe not the closest we've been lately, but still family. And Piper is part of that family. I felt a lump come up in my throat. Lynn had always been like that, ready to lend a helping hand, even if we hadn't spoken in months. Thank you, I said sincerely. Really, thank you. You're welcome, she said. Now tell me, what kind of girl is my niece? I hardly know her. I told Lynn about Piper, her love of stories, her insight, the way she perked up when she felt accepted and loved. Sounds like she's a wonderful girl, Lynn said. I can't wait to meet her. She really is wonderful, I agreed. And she deserves better than what she's gotten so far. We agreed that I would visit with Piper tomorrow afternoon. Lynn promised to contact a lawyer and see what our options were. Finished talking, I stood on the balcony for a while longer, looking up at the stars. For the first time in this whole crazy day, I felt like I had a plan, a direction. I wasn't alone in this struggle. I walked back to the room and carefully closed the balcony door. Piper was still sound asleep, her breathing even and calm. I sat quietly on my bed without turning on the light and wondered what was going on at Owen's house right now. They must be furious. Rebecca is probably already plotting revenge, calculating how to turn the situation in her favor. Owen is probably torn between anger at me and guilt over his daughter. It's a familiar emotion. I experienced it myself years ago when I realized I was repeating my father's mistakes in raising my son. But unlike me, Owen hadn't yet seen what he was doing wrong. Or he did, but he was too proud to admit it, or too afraid to stand up to his overbearing wife. My phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. I opened it and saw just one line. You're going to regret this. Ear, Rebecca. Somehow she'd gotten my number, probably from Owen's phone. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. She wasn't the type to forgive humiliation, especially public humiliation. I didn't bother replying, just deleted the message. Threats didn't scare me. I'd seen too many real dangers in my life to fear the wrath of a spoiled woman with a mania for control. But I realized she wouldn't stop at the message. Rebecca was the kind of person who always got her way at any cost. And right now she was losing control of the situation, and it was probably driving her crazy. I checked the lock on the room door, just in case. It was unlikely they'd try anything tonight, but caution never hurt. In the morning, Piper and I will leave for Charlottesville to go to Lynn's. It'll be safer there, and we'll have time to develop a long-term plan. I didn't know how this would end, but I was determined to do everything I could to protect my granddaughter. With those thoughts in mind, I went to bed, looking at Piper sleeping peacefully. In the dim light of the street lamp coming through the window, her face seemed serene. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, she slept peacefully, without fear of tomorrow, without the pressure of expectations, without the need to be perfect. It had been 3 weeks since that Thanksgiving when I'd taken Piper away from her parents' house. 3 weeks filled with legal advice, nervous phone calls, and the gradual return of a smile to my granddaughter's face. Piper and I lived with Lynn in Charlottesville, in a cozy 2-story house with a large garden and an oak tree swing. My sister was a real lifesaver. Not only did she provide us with shelter, but she also helped put us in touch with Haley Carson, an experienced family law attorney. Haley immediately took on our case after listening to Piper's story and reviewing the little evidence we had. According to her, the situation was difficult, but not hopeless. The courts usually side with the biological parents in these cases, she explained at our first meeting. But if we can prove neglect and emotional abuse, you have a chance of getting at least temporary custody. She advised us to gather as much evidence as possible of the inappropriate parenting methods used by Owen and Rebecca. Piper began keeping a journal, writing down everything she could remember about life in her parents' home. The punishments, the restrictions, the constant pressure. "I didn't have a childhood," she said one evening as we sat on the porch of Lynn's house. "I only realized it now when I saw how Maggie lived." Maggie, Lynn's daughter, became fast friends with Piper. They were complete opposites. Maggie loud and energetic, Piper quiet and thoughtful. But somehow they found common ground. For the first time in her life, my granddaughter had a real friend. Not Rebecca's carefully selected, suitable company, but just a girl her own age with whom she could laugh, share secrets, and just be a kid. I could see Piper gradually changing from a tense, constantly expecting criticism to a more relaxed, curious child. She was still serious beyond her years, but now she sometimes allowed herself to goof off, run in the rain, eat ice cream out of the container, all the little joys she had been deprived of before. Of course, it wasn't without its difficulties. Owen and Rebecca were not going down without a fight. They filed a kidnapping report the second day after we left, but quickly withdrew it when Haley threatened a counterclaim for abuse. They then tried to act through the school, claiming that Piper was skipping classes. Haley quickly arranged homeschooling for Piper, providing all the necessary paperwork. They tried to pressure me through mutual acquaintances, spreading rumors about my supposedly unstable psyche and inability to care for a child. But I had experienced too much in my life to pay attention to gossip. The hardest blow was when they showed up at Lynn's house with the police, demanding the baby be returned immediately. Fortunately, Haley had foreseen this possibility and got a temporary restraining order prohibiting them from going near Piper until the investigation was complete. That's when they changed tactics. Rebecca began appearing on local television, telling touching stories about how she missed her daughter and how her abusive father-in-law had stolen her child. She knew how to manipulate public opinion. Her version of events made me look like a villain destroying a happy family. Owen preferred to keep a low profile, only occasionally making brief statements in support of his wife. I knew that deep down he knew he was guilty, but was too proud or too cowardly to admit it. Today was to be a crucial court hearing. The judge had to rule on temporary custody of Piper based on all the evidence gathered. Haley and I had been preparing for this day for weeks, gathering testimony from Piper's teachers, neighbors, even a few parents of her classmates who had noticed Rebecca's strange behavior. Grandpa, I'm scared," Piper confessed the morning I helped her pick out clothes for court. "What if the judge makes me go back to them?" "That won't happen," I tried to sound more confident than I really felt. "Haley's a great lawyer, and we have proof. Everything's going to be okay." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She had learned to trust me over the weeks, but her fear of her parents was still strong. We arrived at the courthouse an hour before the hearing. Haley was already waiting for us at the entrance, an elegant woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes and a confident posture. "Are you ready?" she asked, shaking my hand and smiling at Piper. "Remember what we discussed. Tell only the truth. Don't try to embellish or exaggerate. Judge Hanson is very experienced in these cases. She knows how to distinguish fact from emotion." We walked into the courtroom, and I immediately saw them, Owen and Rebecca, sitting across the table from each other. Rebecca was in a strict navy blue suit, her hair in a modest bun, her makeup minimal, the perfect image of a caring mother. Owen, in suit and tie, looked tense. He avoided looking in our direction. When the judge entered, an elderly woman with gray hair and an attentive gaze, there was silence in the room. The hearing began. Haley spoke first, stating our position. Piper had been emotionally abused and neglected by her parents, disproportionately punished for the slightest misbehavior, deprived of basic childhood joys, and created an unhealthy atmosphere of constant pressure and fear of failure. Then Owen and Rebecca's attorney, a gaunt man with a perfectly trimmed beard, took the floor. He painted a very different picture. Loving parents striving to give their daughter the best education and opportunities, and an angry grandfather who, out of a personal grudge against his daughter-in-law, was determined to destroy the family. Mr. Bolton was always against his son's marriage, the lawyer broadcast. He had never hidden his disapproval of their methods of education, considering them too strict, although in fact they were simply modern and result-oriented. I clenched my fists under the table, holding back from jumping up and screaming in his face that he was lying. Haley, as if sensing my condition, put a hand on my shoulder. "They're going to provoke you," she whispered. "Don't give in." The hardest part was when Piper had to testify. She sat in a special chair in front of the judge, so small and fragile in this huge room. But when she began to speak, her voice sounded surprisingly firm. She told of that day in the cold, of punishments for not getting good enough grades, of endless extra classes, of how she had once been locked in her room all day for getting second place in a spelling contest. "I always tried to be good," she said at the end of her story, "but I never managed to be good enough for them." I saw Owen's face tremble when she said those words, but Rebecca remained impenetrable, only occasionally shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to be as objective as possible, describing only what I saw with my own eyes and avoiding emotional assessments. But when Owen's attorney began his cross-examination, it became more difficult to remain calm. "Mr. Bolton," he began with fake politeness, "don't you think it's strange that you, a man who spent most of his son's life in the military, have suddenly become an expert on parenting?" "I don't consider myself an expert," I replied flatly, "but I do know that a child should not stand in the cold as punishment for a broken vase. And you do not allow the idea that your granddaughter may have exaggerated the situation, or that you, having a bias against Piper's parents, might have misinterpreted what you saw." I saw what I saw. I looked him straight in the eye. My granddaughter's blue lips, her trembling hands, her fear. "That's not an interpretation. Those are facts." The lawyer kept pushing, trying to paint me as an unstable old man, meddling in the wrong business. But I held firm, and from the look on the judge's face, she wasn't too impressed with his tactics. When all the testimony had been given, the judge called a recess for a decision. Haley, Piper, and I stepped out into the hallway. Owen and Rebecca kept to the other end of the hallway, surrounded by their attorneys. "What do you think our chances are?" I asked Haley quietly. "Not bad," she sounded confident. Piper's testimony was very convincing, and we have other people's testimony. But I can't promise anything. Judge Hanson is notoriously unpredictable. Piper sat next to me, holding my hand tightly. She looked exhausted, but she held herself with surprising dignity for her age. Suddenly, I noticed Owen had separated from his group and was heading toward us. Haley tensed, ready to intervene, but I gestured to her that I could handle it. "Piper, wait here with Haley," I said to my granddaughter. "I need to talk to your father." I stood up and walked toward my son. We stopped halfway down, in the neutral zone of the hallway. "What do you want, Owen?" I asked without preamble. He looked exhausted, the circles under his eyes, the unshaven chin, the nervous tick at the corner of his mouth. "I want it to stop," he said quietly. "This whole circus, you're destroying our family." "Family?" I grinned bitterly. "What you and Rebecca have created is not a family. It's a prison for your daughter." "You don't understand," he shook his head. "The world has changed since you raised me. The competition has gotten tougher. If we don't prepare Piper—" "For what, Owen?" I interrupted. "A life without joy? For the eternal pursuit of unattainable perfection? Did you see her face when she talked about your family? Did you hear the fear in her voice?" He looked away. "Maybe we've been too harsh on some things, but we can change. Give us a chance." "You say we, but I only see you here," I remarked. "Rebecca doesn't think you need to change, does she?" He was silent, and that silent answer told me all I needed to know. "Owen," I sighed, "I will always love you because you are my son. But right now, I have to protect Piper, even if it means going against you." "You're ruining my life." There was resentment in his voice. "Do you have any idea what will happen when people find out my daughter was taken from me? What will my colleagues, my partners think?" "That's the problem." I shook my head. "Ha, you're worried about your reputation, not the welfare of your child." "That's not true," he countered, but without conviction. "It is, and you know it." I looked him straight in the eye. "When was the last time you asked Piper what she wanted? Not what Rebecca wants for her, not what will impress your friends, but what will make your daughter happy." He was silent, and I could see the conflicting emotions struggling in his eyes. "It's not too late to change, Owen," I said more gently. "But you have to make a choice, your daughter or your reputation. You can't have both if you keep ruining her childhood." "You leave me no choice," he said, bitterness in his voice. "There's always a choice," I countered. "You can go to your wife right now and tell her that you were both wrong, that you're willing to work with a counselor, to change your approach to parenting, that you want Piper to be happy, not just successful." "Rebecca will never agree," he shook his head. "Then you'll have to choose between her and your daughter." I was ruthless in my honesty. "Because I won't let Piper go back to that toxic environment, even if I have to fight you for the rest of my life." Our conversation was interrupted by the bell announcing the resumption of the meeting. Owen threw one last look at me, a mixture of anger, resentment, and what I thought was a glimmer of understanding, and turned back to his wife. I joined Piper and Haley, and we entered the courtroom. Judge Hanson was already sitting at her desk, looking over some papers. When everyone had taken their seats, she looked up. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented and listened to all the testimony," she began. "This is a complicated case, like most custody cases. On the one hand, there is a presumption in favor of the biological parents. On the other, the welfare of the child is always a priority for the court." She paused, looking around the room. "Based on the testimony of Piper Bolton, the testimony of her grandfather, and the other evidence presented, I find that there are substantial grounds to believe that she was emotionally abused and neglected in her parents' home. Therefore, I hereby order that temporary custody of Piper Bolton be transferred to her grandfather, Terrence Bolton, for a period of 6 months." A whisper rippled through the room. Rebecca jumped up from her seat, but the lawyer held up her hand. "During that time," the judge continued, "the parents are to undergo psychological counseling and a parenting program. They are allowed weekly supervised meetings with their daughter. After 6 months, we will review the situation and make a final decision." She banged the gavel, ending the meeting. I felt Piper squeeze my hand tightly. Haley smiled, whispering, "We won the first round." But I looked at Owen and Rebecca. She was furious, whispering something fiercely to her lawyer. And Owen? Owen was looking at Piper with an expression I couldn't quite pinpoint, a mixture of regret, confusion, and maybe a glimmer of realization. As we left the hall, I felt a hand on my shoulder. When I turned around, I saw Owen. "Take care of her," he said quietly. "She deserves better than what we've given her." It wasn't peace, not reconciliation, but maybe the first step toward realization. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and Piper and I walked out of the courthouse. 6 months later, spring came early to Richmond. It was early March, and the cherry blossoms had already enveloped our garden in a pink haze. I sat on the veranda, watching Piper and her new friend Zoe build a fairy house under an old oak tree. A lot had changed in those 6 months. I officially became Piper's guardian. Permanent, not temporary. Owen and Rebecca underwent court-ordered therapy, but the results were inconsistent. Rebecca attended sessions formally, not recognizing her mistakes and believing the whole situation to be unfair. Owen, to my surprise, took therapy more seriously. According to their psychologist, he began to recognize problems in their parenting approach. Their supervised meetings with Piper were tense. Rebecca constantly asked about grades, classes, accomplishments, as if nothing had changed. Owen tried to establish more natural communication, but years of emotional distance had done its work. Both he and Piper felt uncomfortable with each other. After 3 months of such meetings, Rebecca suddenly announced that she and Owen were leaving for New York. She had been offered a job at a major TV station. This was her chance for national fame, and she was not going to miss it. Owen, as always, followed her. Their departure was the final point in our story. They gave up the custody battle, agreeing to monthly video calls and possible visits from Piper to them on vacations, if she wanted them to. Lynn said Rebecca was secretly relieved. Her daughter had always been less a favorite child for her than a project, a commitment, a means to prove her worthiness as a mother. Now that the project was officially closed, she could focus entirely on her career without feeling guilty. As for Owen, I wasn't sure. Sometimes he called separately from Rebecca, asking about Piper in an uncertain voice. There was a new note in our conversations, not intimacy, but at least mutual respect. Perhaps in time he would find the strength to be a better father, but that would be his choice and his path. In the meantime, Piper and I were building a new life. I sold my old house and bought this one, with a big garden, close to a good school, where Piper quickly made friends. For the first time in her life, she could just be a child. Play, dream, sometimes be lazy, sometimes make mistakes. She still loved learning, but now she did it out of curiosity rather than fear of punishment. She continued to play the piano, but only the pieces she liked and only when she was in the mood. She also started writing stories. Wonderful, full of fantasy and unexpected twists and turns. I was her first reader and most devoted fan. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. Some nights I could hear her crying. Years of emotional abuse had left scars that wouldn't heal quickly. We worked with a child psychologist to help her deal with her anxiety, perfectionism, and fear of disappointing others. "Grandpa, look!" Piper shouted, distracting me from my musings. "We made a fairy bed out of leaves and moss." I smiled and walked over to get a better look at their creation. "Impressive," I praised. "I think any self-respecting fairy would be happy to live in a house like this." The girls giggled, proud of their work. "Can Zoe stay for dinner?" Piper asked. "Sure," I nodded. I was just about to make pancakes. "Chocolate chip?" A mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. "Any topping you choose." I winked at her. Piper brightened and ran into the kitchen with her friend to help with the preparations. I watched her go, and my heart filled with gratitude. Despite all the difficulties, all the battles with Owen and Rebecca, all the legal complications, it had been worth it. Seeing my granddaughter running around, laughing, living life to the fullest was the greatest reward. Rebecca's face would occasionally flash on the evening news. She did get a job as an anchorwoman on a national channel. She always looked impeccable, spoke the right words, exuded confidence and competence. In a recent interview, she mentioned in passing that her daughter was living with her grandfather. While my husband and I build our careers in New York, not a word about the court battles, the violence, the broken relationship. To the public, they were still the perfect family, just with an unusual household organization. It didn't bother me. Let Rebecca maintain her image. Let Owen follow her down the path they'd chosen. Piper and I had our own path, maybe not as shiny and impressive, but filled with genuine joy and love. I walked into the kitchen where the girls were already pulling out the ingredients for pancakes, arguing over whether chocolate or strawberry was the best topping. "Sure, why don't we do both?" I suggested, putting on my apron. "May I?" Piper looked at me as surprised as if I'd suggested something revolutionary. "Sure," I smiled. Life's too short to limit yourself to just one kind of pancake. She laughed, lightly and freely, as a child should. And in that laugh, I heard an echo of Elaine's laughter. And I thought that somewhere she was smiling, looking at us. We weren't a perfect family. We were just a family. Real, imperfect, but loving. And in the end, that was all that mattered.